beneath a canopy of ancient oaks, dripping with Spanish moss, where the Mississippi weaves its lazy path, stands Halworth Manor, a haunting shadow of Southern glory. This isn't just a house. It's a legend whispering tales of the Halworth family, whose name sparks both awe and unease. Old money, older blood, and secrets buried deep in Louisiana's soul. They outlasted the Civil War, their fortune untouched while neighbors crumbled. Was it cunning business or something far stranger? Forget the sprawling sugarcane fields or their faded wealth. Something else makes the Halworths unforgettable. Buckle up, because we're diving into a story that'll grip you tighter than the moss on those ancient trees. Now, what made people cross themselves when passing their iron gates was something far more peculiar. Since 1815, every single Halworth wedding had ended in flames. And yet, most curiously of all, not a single soul had ever perished in these fires. Our story begins in the summer of 1875, as the last Halworth daughter prepared to tempt fate at the altar once more. The carriage rattled up the long drive to Halworth Manor, wheels crunching on shell-lined paths between rows of oak trees that had witnessed generations of the family's triumphs and tribulations. Inside sat Jonathan Pierce, a young journalist from New Orleans, clutching his leather satchel containing notebooks, pencils, and a relatively new Remington typewriter that had cost him nearly 3 months' wages. He'd received a letter 3 weeks prior, the elegant script unmistakably feminine, requesting his presence at Halworth Manor. The letter had been signed simply E. Halworth, with a postscript that had instantly captured his attention. I wish to tell the true story of my family's curse before I become its next victim. Jonathan adjusted his collar, uncomfortable in the Louisiana heat, despite his lightweight linen suit. As a writer for the New Orleans Picayune, he'd covered everything from riverboat accidents to political scandals, but nothing had intrigued him quite like the Halworth legend. Even in New Orleans, some 60 miles away, people spoke in hushed tones about the family whose weddings always ended in inexplicable blazes. The carriage came to a halt before the grand house. Halworth Manor had clearly seen better days. Paint peeled from the columns, and several shutters hung askew, but it maintained an undeniable dignity. The Civil War and subsequent economic hardships had taken their toll. But unlike many plantations that now stood abandoned, Halworth Manor remained inhabited, a resilient vestige of a fading era. A servant, an older black man in a formal but somewhat dated livery, appeared at the carriage door. "Mr. Pierce, I presume." His voice was deep, measured. "Miss Eliza is expecting you. Please follow me." Jonathan nodded, gathering his belongings before following the man up the broad steps to the entrance. The heavy oak door creaked open to reveal a foyer that spoke of faded opulence. A crystal chandelier missing several pieces, a once fine carpet now threadbare in places, walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Halworths from generations past. "Wait here, if you please." The servant disappeared down a hallway, leaving Jonathan alone with the watchful eyes of Halworth ancestors. One portrait in particular caught his attention. A young woman in a wedding dress, her expression not one of joy, but of resignation. The frame was slightly blackened around the edges as though it had been rescued from a fire. "That's my great-aunt Catherine," came a voice from behind him. Jonathan turned to find a woman in her early 20s regarding him with intelligent eyes. Her dress, while well-made, was several years out of fashion, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style that contrasted with the elaborate coiffures currently favored by ladies of society. "Miss Halworth?" Jonathan asked, offering a slight bow. "Eliza Halworth," she confirmed, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Pierce. I wasn't certain you would." "Your letter was compelling," he replied, carefully setting down his typewriter case. "Though I must admit, I'm curious why you chose me. Surely there are more prominent writers who would leap at the chance to document the Halworth story." A wry smile crossed Eliza's face. "More prominent writers have already tried, Mr. Pierce. They came seeking sensationalism and left with fabrications. Your articles show a respect for truth, even when it's less exciting than fiction. That's what my family's story needs. Truth, not embellishment." She gestured toward a doorway. "Please, let's speak in the library. It's cooler there, and we'll have privacy." The library was a large room lined with bookshelves that reached the high ceiling. Despite the summer heat, the thick walls kept the space bearable. A ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, stirring the air just enough to provide relief. Large windows overlooked the garden, where roses battled against encroaching wilderness. Eliza took a seat in a leather armchair and motioned for Jonathan to do the same. A tea service had been laid out on a small table between them. "You must have questions," she said, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups that looked as though they'd survived from before the war. Jonathan removed a notebook from his satchel. "Many," he admitted, "but perhaps we should start with the most obvious. Is it true what they say, that every Halworth wedding since 1815 has ended in fire?" "Yes," Eliza replied without hesitation. 14 weddings, 14 fires. The most recent was my cousin William's just 3 years ago. The entire east wing of the house had to be rebuilt." She gestured toward the window. "You can still see the newer brickwork if you look carefully. And no one has ever died in these fires. Not a single person, not even a slight burn. It's as if the flames know exactly what they're doing." She stirred her tea thoughtfully. "That's what makes it a mystery rather than simply a tragedy." Jonathan scribbled notes. "And you're to be married soon." Eliza nodded, a complex emotion crossing her features. 2 weeks from Saturday, to Charles Beaumont from a good family in Baton Rouge. A favorable match, as they say. She didn't sound particularly enthusiastic. "Aren't you concerned, given the family history?" "Of course I am," she replied, setting down her cup with a faint clink. "That's why you're here. I want the truth documented before." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Before whatever happens. What do you believe causes these fires, Miss Halworth?" Eliza's gaze drifted to the window. "Some call it a curse. Others blame coincidence or carelessness. My grandmother spoke of angry spirits. My father refuses to discuss it at all." She turned back to Jonathan. "I believe that somewhere in my family's past lies the answer, which is why I've been researching our history." She rose and crossed to a desk, retrieving a leather-bound journal. "This was my great-grandfather's journal. He witnessed the first fire in 1815. She handed it to Jonathan. "It began with Josephine Halworth's wedding to Edmund Blackwood." Jonathan carefully opened the journal. The pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was precise if archaic in style. He found the entry for June 18, 1815. "Today was to be a day of celebration, but has ended in confusion and fear," he read aloud. Josephine looked radiant as Edmund placed the ring upon her finger. The ceremony had concluded, vows exchanged, when the first cry of fire rang out. The east parlor was engulfed so quickly one might have thought the devil himself had struck the match. Yet, as guests fled in terror, not one was harmed, though the flames leapt high enough to be seen from the river. Most peculiar of all, when the smoke cleared, we discovered Josephine's wedding portrait, which had hung in that very parlor, completely untouched by the flames, though everything around it was reduced to ash. Jonathan looked up at Eliza. "This is extraordinary. Keep reading," she urged. "The pattern repeats with every wedding. Always a fire, always after the vows are exchanged, never any casualties, and always one object inexplicably spared from the flames." Jonathan flipped through more entries, finding accounts of subsequent weddings, each ending the same way. "Has anyone ever broken the pattern? Refused to marry, perhaps?" "My great-uncle Theodore tried," Eliza said, returning to her seat. "In 1843, he and his bride eloped to avoid the family curse. They were married in a small ceremony in Texas." Her voice grew softer. "That night, the hotel where they were staying caught fire. Again, no deaths, not even injuries. But it seems the curse follows Halworth blood regardless of where the wedding takes place." "And what about your parents? Your mother must have known what she was marrying into." A shadow passed over Eliza's face. "My mother was unconventional. She found the legend thrilling rather than frightening. Their wedding fire destroyed the ballroom." She paused. but she died 5 years later in childbirth. My younger brother, who also did not survive. It's the only death associated with our family that wasn't natural old age or the war. Jonathan made more notes, his mind racing with questions. You mentioned objects spared from the flames. Is there a pattern there? That's one thing I've been investigating, Eliza said, leaning forward with new animation. After each fire, one item remains untouched. Always something significant to the bride or groom, but never the same type of object twice. A portrait, a book, a music box, a pair of gloves. There seems to be no logic to it. Have you collected these items? Those that could be moved? Yes, they're in what we call the sanctuary room on the 3rd floor. She hesitated. I can show you if you'd like. I would indeed, Jonathan replied. As they rose to leave the library, a tall, distinguished-looking man appeared in the doorway. His dark hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and he carried himself with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to authority. His expression upon seeing Jonathan was decidedly unwelcoming. Eliza, I wasn't aware we were entertaining visitors, he said, his tone making it clear this was no mere observation. Father, Eliza acknowledged with a subtle tension in her voice. This is Mr. Jonathan Pierce from the New Orleans Picayune. Mr. Pierce, my father, Colonel James Halworth. Jonathan extended his hand. An honor, sir. The colonel regarded Jonathan's hand for a moment before giving it a perfunctory shake. A newspaper man. I wasn't consulted about this, Eliza. Mr. Pierce is here at my invitation, Eliza replied with quiet firmness. I wrote to him regarding the family history.
Colonel Halworth's jaw tightened.
I see. Mr. Pierce, while I'm sure you've come a long way, I'm afraid my daughter has wasted your time. Our family matters are private. Father, Eliza protested. We've discussed this. With my wedding approaching. Enough. The colonel cut her off, though his voice remained controlled. Mr. Pierce, you'll have to excuse us. Family matter. His tone made it clear the discussion was over. Jonathan glanced at Eliza, who gave him a look that silently asked him to comply for now. Of course, he said, gathering his notebook. Perhaps we can continue our conversation tomorrow, Miss Halworth. Before Eliza could answer, her father spoke. My daughter will be occupied with wedding preparations. Isaac will show you to your carriage. Father, Eliza said with unexpected steel in her voice, Mr. Pierce has traveled a considerable distance. At the very least, we should offer him our hospitality for the night. It's nearly dusk, and the road to New Orleans is not safe after dark. The colonel looked as though he might object, but after a moment, he gave a curt nod. Very well. Isaac will show Mr. Pierce to the guest room in the West Wing. He fixed his daughter with a stern look. We'll discuss this matter privately. With that, he turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall. I apologize for my father, Eliza said once he was out of earshot. The war changed him. He doesn't like to speak of the fires or much else from the past. No apology necessary, Jonathan assured her. Many carry wounds from those years, visible and invisible. Eliza nodded gratefully. I still wish to show you the sanctuary room, but it will have to wait until tomorrow. My father will retire early, as he always does. Isaac, the servant who had greeted Jonathan upon arrival, appeared at the doorway. If you'll follow me, sir, I'll show you to your room. Jonathan gathered his belongings and followed Isaac up a grand staircase and through corridors that spoke of the house's labyrinthine nature. The West Wing appeared less affected by time and circumstances than other parts of the mansion he'd glimpsed. Here you are, sir, Isaac said, opening a door to reveal a well-appointed guest room. Dinner will be served at 7 in the small dining room. I'll return to escort you. Thank you, Isaac, Jonathan said. Then, as the man turned to leave, added, Have you been with the Halworth family long? Isaac paused. All my life, sir. My mother served the family before me, and her mother before that. Then you've witnessed some of these wedding fires yourself. Something unreadable flickered across Isaac's face. 3 of them, sir. What do you make of them? Isaac was silent for a moment, then replied carefully, "It's not my place to say, sir, but in my experience, old houses hold on to their histories, for better or worse." He glanced down the hallway. "If you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to." Left alone, Jonathan set up his typewriter on a small writing desk by the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the grounds. In the distance, he could see what appeared to be an old family cemetery, its monuments standing like silent sentinels among the trees. He began to type, recording his initial observations and the information Eliza had shared. The story was even more intriguing than he'd anticipated. Not merely a series of strange coincidences, but a genuine mystery spanning generations. The dinner that evening was a tense affair. Colonel Halworth maintained a cold civility, directing most conversation toward mundane topics. The weather, the sugarcane harvest, politics in New Orleans. Eliza spoke little, though Jonathan caught her watching him thoughtfully when she thought he wasn't looking. A fourth person joined them at the table, Charles Beaumont, Eliza's fiancé. He was a handsome man, perhaps 5 years Eliza's senior, with the confident manner of someone accustomed to privilege. That he seemed pleasant enough, if somewhat self-absorbed, and showed no apparent concern about marrying into a family with such an unusual history. "Mr. Pierce is a journalist, Charles," Eliza explained during a lull in conversation. "Is that so?" Charles responded with polite interest. "Working on anything of note?" Before Jonathan could reply, Colonel Halworth interjected. "Mr. Pierce is merely passing through. He'll be returning to New Orleans tomorrow." Jonathan met Eliza's eyes across the table. Her expression remained neutral, but he detected a subtle determination there. "Actually," she said, setting down her fork, "I've invited Mr. Pierce to stay through the week. I thought it might be interesting to have an account of the wedding preparations for the society page." Her father's expression darkened, but in the presence of his future son-in-law, he merely said, "We'll discuss this later, Eliza." Charles, oblivious to the undercurrents, launched into a story about a recent hunting expedition. Jonathan noticed that while he spoke animatedly to the colonel, he rarely addressed Eliza directly, and when he did, it was with the indulgent tone one might use with a child. After dinner, Colonel Halworth invited Charles to his study for brandy and cigars, pointedly excluding Jonathan. As they departed, Eliza approached him in the hallway. "Meet me at the back staircase in 1 hour," she whispered. "We'll visit the sanctuary room then." Jonathan returned to his room to wait, using the time to organize his notes. The house grew quieter as the evening progressed, occasional footsteps or distant voices the only indication of other inhabitants. At the appointed time, he made his way to the back staircase, a narrow, utilitarian affair clearly meant for servants, quite unlike the grand staircase he'd descended earlier. Eliza was waiting, a small oil lamp in her hand. "This way," she said softly. The stairs creaked less on the right side. They ascended to the 3rd floor, a space that felt distinctly different from the rest of the house. Lower ceilings, narrower hallways, simpler furnishings. Eliza led him to a door at the end of a corridor, producing a key from her pocket. "My grandmother gave me this key on her deathbed," she explained as she unlocked the door. "She said I would need it when the time came to understand our family's burden." The door swung open to reveal a room unlike any Jonathan had expected. It was circular, occupying what must be one of the house's turrets. Glass-fronted cabinets lined the walls, each containing a single object. The center of the room held a large round table covered with maps, journals, and loose papers. Eliza lit several more lamps, illuminating the space. "This is the sanctuary room," she said. "Every object you see survived one of the wedding fires." Jonathan moved slowly around the room, examining the displayed items. Just as Eliza had described, they were an eclectic collection. A portrait miniature of a young woman, a leather-bound Bible, a silver hairbrush, a child's porcelain doll, a gentleman's pocket watch, a pressed flower preserved between glass plates, and several other seemingly random objects. "This is extraordinary," he murmured. "Have you determined any connection between them?" "Not yet," Eliza admitted. joining him by one of the cabinets. This music box belonged to my great-aunt Louisa. It was playing during her wedding reception when the fire broke out in 1837. Everything in that room was destroyed except this box, which continued to play its melody even as the flames raged around it. She moved to another cabinet. This fan was found untouched amid the ashes of my cousin Rebecca's wedding fire in 1862. It had been a gift from her fiancé, who died at Shiloh before they could marry. She carried it with her down the aisle when she wed another man months later. Jonathan studied the objects, trying to discern a pattern. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward one of the cabinets. Eliza nodded, and he carefully opened the glass door to examine a small leather-bound book. "What's this one's story?" "That belonged to my grandfather," Eliza explained. "A collection of Shakespeare's sonnets. He was reading from it to my grandmother just before their ceremony when it had to be moved indoors due to unexpected rain. The book was found untouched on a completely incinerated table after their wedding fire." Jonathan gently returned the book to its place. "And what about the table here? These papers?" "My research," Eliza said, moving to the table. "I've been trying to trace the origins of what some call our curse, family trees, old correspondence, historical records of the region." She gestured to a map. "I've marked the location of every wedding fire. At first, they were all here at Halworth Manor, but as family members moved away or chose other venues, the fires followed." Jonathan examined the map, noting pins placed throughout Louisiana, with a few in neighboring states. "And when did this begin? You mentioned 1815. "Yes, with Josephine Halworth's wedding," Eliza confirmed. "Before that, there's no record of any unusual occurrences at family weddings." "What changed in 1815? Jonathan asked, his journalistic instincts sensing the central question. Eliza's expression became troubled. "That's what I've been trying to discover. There's a gap in our family records from 1813 to 1816. Pages missing from journals, correspondence unaccounted for. It's as if someone deliberately removed anything that might explain what happened." She pulled out a chair and sat, suddenly looking tired. "My grandmother spoke of a family secret, something terrible that happened before Josephine's wedding, but she died before telling me what it was." Jonathan took the seat across from her. "Do you have any theories?" Eliza hesitated, then nodded toward a cabinet in the corner, separate from the others. "That's the only item I haven't been able to open." Jonathan approached the cabinet to find a small wooden box, its surface intricately carved with symbols he didn't recognize. Unlike the other cabinets, this one had no glass front. It was a solid wooden container with a peculiar lock. "What is it?" "It was found after the first fire, Josephine's wedding. According to my great-grandfather's journal, it appeared on the mantelpiece after the flames were extinguished, though no one remembered seeing it there before. No key has ever been found that fits its lock." Jonathan examined the box without touching it. "These carvings, they look West African, perhaps." Eliza looked at him with new interest. "How would you recognize such things?" "I spent 2 years as a correspondent in Haiti before the war," Jonathan explained. "I saw similar symbols there associated with voodoo practices." A new light entered Eliza's eyes. "Of course, the slaves. My research has focused so much on the Halworth family themselves. I may have overlooked." She quickly moved to a stack of ledgers on a shelf. "These are the plantation records. Names, purchases, births, deaths." She pulled out a particularly old volume. "This covers the period just before 1815. Together they pored over the faded entries. Most were mundane accounts of purchases, crop yields, and property transactions." Then Jonathan's finger stopped on an entry from December 1814. "Look at this," he said. "Purchased from New Orleans, one female slave named Celestine. Age approximately 20 years. Price $800. And a note. Claimed knowledge of healing arts." Eliza frowned. "That's unusual. My ancestors typically purchased slaves from local traders or neighboring plantations, rarely directly from New Orleans, and the price, that's extremely high for the time." Jonathan turned the page, finding another entry from February 1815. Incident with new slave Celestine. Disciplinary action taken. See Private Journal. Private Journal. Jonathan asked. My great-grandfather kept separate records for sensitive matters, Eliza explained, her voice tight. Most of those journals were destroyed during the war, or so my father claims. They continued searching through the ledgers, finding one more mention of Celestine in May 1815, just weeks before Josephine's wedding. Celestine discovered missing this morning. Search of grounds unsuccessful. Presumed runaway. Reward of $100 posted in parish. No further mention of her. Jonathan asked, checking the subsequent pages. Eliza shook her head. Nothing I can find. Jonathan sat back, his mind working through the implications. A woman with knowledge of healing arts, likely a euphemism for spiritual practices, arrives at Halworth Manor months before the first wedding fire. There's some kind of incident requiring disciplinary action, and then she disappears shortly before the wedding. You think she might have placed a curse on the family? Eliza asked, her expression a mix of skepticism and intrigue. I'm simply noting the coincidence, Jonathan replied. Though I've encountered similar stories in my travels, beliefs in curses and spiritual retribution are common across many cultures. Eliza was silent for a moment, then said, There's someone who might know more. Old May lives in a cabin at the edge of the property. She was born here on Halworth land before emancipation. Her mother would have been here in 1815. Would she speak with us? With me, perhaps, Eliza said. She delivered me when I was born and has always been kind to me. She trailed off. Despite your family's history as slaveholders, Jonathan finished gently. Eliza nodded, looking uncomfortable. The war may have ended slavery, but it didn't erase the past. My father still treats the former slaves who remained as if nothing changed. He pays them now, but barely enough to live on. Many stayed because they had nowhere else to go. She closed the ledger with a decisive motion. We should visit May tomorrow. She tends to be more forthcoming in the morning. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside, causing both of them to freeze. We should leave separately, she whispered. I'll go first. Wait 5 minutes, then return to your room. And Mr. Pierce, she paused at the door. Yes, be careful what you say around my father. He's not as frail as his age might suggest. With that cryptic warning, she slipped out, leaving Jonathan alone with the curious artifacts of the Halworth family's fiery history. Morning brought a heavy fog that clung to the grounds of Halworth Manor, obscuring the boundaries between the manicured gardens and the wild bayou beyond. Jonathan rose early, hoping to explore the property before breakfast. Dressed in his lightest clothes against the already mounting humidity, he made his way downstairs. The house was quiet, save for the distant sounds of activity from the kitchen. He slipped out a side door onto a flagstone path that led through gardens now showing signs of neglect. Roses growing wild, hedges untrimmed, fountains dry. Beyond the formal gardens lay the family cemetery he had glimpsed the previous evening. Iron gates hung slightly ajar, as if inviting him to enter. The fog gave the graveyard an otherworldly quality, headstones emerging from the mist like specters. The Halworth dead were interred in elaborate tombs and mausoleums, necessary in a land where the water table lay so close to the surface. Generations of the family rested here, their names and dates chronicling the family's long presence in Louisiana. One tomb in particular caught Jonathan's attention. Newer than most, its white marble not yet weathered by time and elements. The inscription read, Eleanor Halworth, beloved wife of Colonel James Halworth, 1832 to 1870. Until we meet again in that land where there is no parting. She wasn't supposed to die that way, came a voice behind him. Jonathan turned to find an elderly black woman regarding him steadily. Despite her age, evident in the deep lines of her face and the silver of her hair, she stood straight, her eyes sharp and evaluating. You must be old May, Jonathan said, recalling Eliza's mention of her. The woman nodded. And you, the newspaper man from New Orleans. Word travels quick, even to my cabin. She moved closer, studying him. What business brings you to the graves so early, Mr. Pierce? Curiosity, he admitted. I'm trying to understand the Halworth family. May made a sound that might have been a laugh. Many have tried. Some things ain't meant to be understood, just respected. She looked past him to Eleanor's tomb. She was different from the rest. Came from upriver, no family connections to speak of. The colonel married her for love, not advantage. Rare thing in those days. Eliza mentioned her mother died in childbirth, Jonathan said carefully. Along with the baby boy, May confirmed. It broke something in the colonel. He was a hard man before, but after losing her, she shook her head. Some wounds never heal right. Did you know Eleanor well? I delivered all her children, the 3 that lived and the 2 that didn't, May replied. She trusted me when she wouldn't trust the white doctors from town. Said I had better sense than men with medical degrees. Jonathan hesitated, then asked, Did Eleanor ever speak of the wedding fires? May's expression grew guarded. Why you asking about such things? Eliza has invited me to document the family history, including the fires. I'm hoping to understand their origin. The old woman was silent for a long moment, her eyes moving from Jonathan to the fog-shrouded tombs around them. Finally, she said, Miss Eliza is coming to see me this morning, ain't she? Jonathan, surprised by her insight, nodded. Then I'll tell both of you together. Some stories shouldn't be told more than once. She turned to leave, then added, Come to my cabin after breakfast. Follow the path past the old sugar mill. And Mr. Pierce, yes, be careful disturbing old graves. Sometimes what's buried is better left that way. With that enigmatic warning, she disappeared into the fog, leaving Jonathan with more questions than answers. Breakfast was served in a small morning room overlooking what had once been a kitchen garden. Only Eliza was present, the colonel and Charles apparently having risen early to attend to business in Baton Rouge. Father won't return until evening, Eliza explained, pouring coffee into delicate porcelain cups. It gives us the day for our investigations. Jonathan told her of his encounter with May at the cemetery. She knew I was planning to visit her, Eliza mused. May has always seemed to know things before they happen. Some call it witchcraft, but I think it's just wisdom and observation. After breakfast, they set out for May's cabin. The fog had begun to lift, revealing the full extent of the plantation. What had once been endless fields of sugarcane was now largely overgrown, with only a fraction still under cultivation. The old sugar mill Eliza mentioned stood as a hulking ruin, its machinery long silent. May's cabin sat at the edge of a cypress swamp, a solidly built structure of cypress wood that had weathered decades of Louisiana seasons. Smoke rose from its chimney, and herbs grew in neat beds around its perimeter. The old woman was waiting for them on the porch, seated in a handmade rocking chair. Took you long enough, she said by way of greeting. Come inside before the heat gets worse. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly spacious and meticulously clean. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, and shelves held an assortment of jars containing powders, liquids, and preserved specimens Jonathan couldn't identify. A fire burned low in the hearth despite the warm day, a pot of something aromatic simmering above it. Sit, May instructed, gesturing to a small table with 3 chairs. She moved to the hearth, stirring the pot before ladling its contents into 3 cups. Drink this while we talk. Good for clearing the mind. The beverage was bitter but not unpleasant, with hints of herbs Jonathan couldn't name. Eliza sipped hers without hesitation, apparently familiar with May's concoctions. You want to know about the wedding fires? May said once they were settled. It wasn't a question. Yes, Eliza confirmed. I'm to be married in less than 2 weeks, May. I need to understand what might happen and why. May's gaze was sympathetic but unwavering. You sure you want to marry that Beaumont boy? Ain't too late to change your mind. Eliza looked down at her cup. Father has invested heavily in Charles's shipping business. The arrangement is mutually beneficial. May snorted. That's what they said about plenty of marriages that ended in misery. But that ain't my business. She leaned back in her chair. You're asking about the fires. What you really want to know about is Celestine. Jonathan and Eliza exchanged surprised glances. We found mention of her in the plantation records, Jonathan explained. A woman purchased from New Orleans in 1814, who disappeared before Josephine Halworth's wedding in 1815. May nodded slowly. My mama told me the story. She was there when Celestine came to Halworth Manor. Said she wasn't like other slaves they'd bought. Held herself like a queen. Spoke perfect French and some English, too. Claimed to be the daughter of a powerful man in Saint-Domingue, what they now call Haiti. The Haitian Revolution ended in 1804, Jonathan noted. She would have been a child when it happened. That's right, May confirmed. Story goes that her father sent her to New Orleans for safety during the fighting, but he was killed before he could reclaim her. She ended up sold to the Halworths. The record mentioned she had knowledge of healing arts, Eliza said. May's expression darkened. That she did. Some called it voodoo, others called it witchcraft. My mama said Celestine could cure ailments no doctor could touch. Fever, blindness, barrenness. Word spread, and people, white and colored alike, would sneak onto Halworth land seeking her help. I imagine that didn't sit well with the family, Jonathan observed. Your great-grandfather tolerated it at first, May said to Eliza. Celestine's remedies helped his own mother's rheumatism when nothing else would. But then Josephine got involved. My great-aunt Josephine, the first bride whose wedding ended in fire. May nodded. Josephine was set to marry Edmund Blackwood, a match arranged since their childhood. But Josephine had fallen in love with another man, a tutor who'd been employed to teach her brothers. When he was dismissed and sent away, she was heartbroken. What does this have to do with Celestine? Jonathan asked. Josephine went to Celestine in secret, asking for something to break the engagement. A potion, a charm, anything that would free her to be with the man she truly loved. Celestine refused, saying such magic would bring only suffering. May paused to sip her beverage before continuing. Josephine didn't take the refusal well. She accused Celestine of insolence, then of stealing, had her whipped publicly as an example. Eliza winced, her face paling. 3 days before the wedding, something happened between them. Something my mama never knew the details of, except that Josephine emerged from Celestine's quarters looking like she'd seen the devil himself. That night, Celestine disappeared. The Halworths claimed she ran away, but May's voice trailed off. But what? Jonathan pressed. May's eyes, when they met his, held centuries of pain. There's an old live oak at the edge of the swamp. Slaves weren't buried in your fancy cemetery, Mr. Pierce. And 3 days later, during Josephine's wedding reception, the first fire started right where she stood with her new husband. The flames circled them but never touched them. Guests fled in panic, but by the time help arrived, the fire had burned itself out, leaving that carved box on the mantelpiece. The box in the sanctuary room, Jonathan realized. May nodded. Every wedding since, the same thing happens. Fire comes but harms no person. And something important always remains untouched. What's in the box, May? Eliza asked. I don't know for certain, the old woman admitted. But my mama said Celestine wore a locket containing something precious to her. Earth from her homeland or a lock of her father's hair, something that held power. Jonathan considered this information. You believe Celestine's spirit is responsible for the fires, a form of revenge. I believe some wrongs don't rest easy, May replied. And I believe Celestine was more than she seemed. The old ways have power, especially when sealed with blood. Eliza stood suddenly, moving to the window. Is there a way to end it? To release her spirit or make amends? May was quiet for a long moment. There might be. My mama said Celestine once told her that every curse contains its own undoing. The answer would be in understanding what was stolen. Stolen? Jonathan repeated. That's all I know, May said with finality. Now, Miss Eliza, if you're determined to go through with this wedding, there's preparations we should discuss. Precautions. Sensing this part of the conversation was not meant for him, Jonathan excused himself, saying he wanted to examine the grounds further. The two women barely acknowledged his departure, already deep in discussion of protective herbs and rituals. Outside, the day had grown hot and humid. The last wisps of morning fog burned away by the relentless Louisiana sun. Jonathan followed a narrow path leading toward the swamp, May's words about the old oak tree echoing in his mind. He found it standing alone at the edge where solid ground gave way to wetland. A massive live oak that must have been centuries old, its branches draped with Spanish moss that swayed gently in the faint breeze. Around its base, small stones had been placed in patterns too deliberate to be natural. An unmarked grave, perhaps, or something else entirely. As Jonathan stood contemplating the tree, a twig snapped behind him. He turned to find Isaac watching him from several yards away. "Mr. Pierce," the servant acknowledged with a slight nod. "Miss Eliza sent me to find you. She's returned to the house and wishes to continue your discussions." "Thank you, Isaac," Jonathan replied. Then, gesturing toward the oak, he asked, "Do you know the significance of this tree?" Isaac's expression remained carefully neutral. "It's just an old tree, sir. Been here longer than any building on the property." May suggested it might mark a burial place. A flicker of something, concern, fear, crossed Isaac's features. "Old May tells many stories, sir. Not all should be taken literally." He gestured back toward the path. "We should return to the house. It's easy to lose one's way in the swamp." As they walked, Jonathan tried another approach. "Isaac, you mentioned yesterday that you've witnessed 3 of the wedding fires yourself. What did you see?" "Exactly." Isaac was silent for several paces before responding. "I saw fire that moved like it had a mind of its own, sir. Flames that danced but didn't consume what they shouldn't. I saw white folks running in terror from something they couldn't control or understand." There was the faintest hint of satisfaction in his voice at that last part. "And the objects left untouched, the artifacts in the sanctuary room? Each one meant something to somebody," Isaac replied cryptically. "Things that brought joy or sorrow, things that changed lives." Before Jonathan could press further, they arrived at the house to find Eliza waiting on the veranda. She had changed into a riding habit and looked determined. "Mr. Pierce," she called, "I've had the stable boy prepare horses. There's somewhere we need to go." The old Blackwood estate, Edmund's family home. "The man Josephine married," Jonathan clarified. "What might we find there?" "Answers, perhaps," Eliza said. "Edmund Blackwood's descendants still own the property, though they rarely visit. May reminded me that the first fire didn't destroy Halworth Manor. It occurred at the Blackwood estate, where the wedding reception was being held." She turned to Isaac. "Please inform my father, should he return early, that Mr. Pierce and I are visiting the Blackwoods as part of the wedding preparations. No need to mention our true purpose." Isaac bowed slightly. "As you wish, Miss Eliza." The ride to the Blackwood estate took nearly 2 hours along roads that had deteriorated since the war. What had once been a prosperous plantation appeared largely abandoned. Its fields, its once grand house showing significant disrepair. "The last Blackwood died in '69, Eliza explained as they dismounted. "A nephew from Charleston inherited but has shown no interest in restoring the property. The overseer lets us use the library occasionally. My father and Edmund's son were friends before the war." The overseer, a gruff man named Thatcher, greeted them with minimal courtesy. Upon hearing they wished to examine old family papers, he merely grunted and led them to the library, leaving them with a warning that the roof leaked in heavy rain and they shouldn't linger past dusk. The Blackwood Library was impressive despite its neglected state. Shelves reaching to the high ceiling, filled with volumes on law, agriculture, history, and literature. "Father mentioned them once," said Edmund. Documented everything from crop yields to family arguments. The cabinet yielded several leather-bound volumes, each meticulously dated on the spine. Eliza quickly located the one covering 1815 and placed it on a reading table. Edmund's handwriting was precise and legible, his entries thorough to the point of tedium. They skimmed past accounts of weather conditions and business transactions, seeking any mention of his approaching wedding. January 15th, 1815. Visited Halworth Manor today to discuss wedding arrangements. Josephine seemed distant, though her father assures me it is merely bridal nerves. Construction of the new East Wing continues apace. It should be completed well before the June ceremony. April 3rd, 1815. Troubling news from Halworth. Apparently one of their slaves, a woman recently purchased from New Orleans, has been causing disruption. James Halworth mentioned the woman claimed to practice some form of heathen magic and had been filling Josephine's head with nonsense. He assured me the situation has been handled. May 22nd, 1815. Josephine finally agreed to a final fitting for her wedding gown after weeks of delays and excuses. Mrs. Halworth confided that Josephine still mourns the departure of her brother's tutor, with whom she had formed an inappropriate attachment. I chose not to press the matter. Such youthful infatuations are best forgotten, and once we are wed, she will learn where her duties truly lie. June 10th, 1815. Final preparations for the wedding are complete. The ceremony will take place at Halworth Manor, followed by a reception here at Blackwood. I have spared no expense. The governor himself will be in attendance, along with the most prominent families of the parish. Josephine's melancholy persists, but I trust marriage will settle her spirit. Then came the entry for June 18th, the wedding day. This morning dawned clear and hot, typical June weather. The ceremony at Halworth proceeded without incident, though I noted Josephine's responses were barely audible. Her father had to prompt her twice. Nevertheless, we are now man and wife before God and man. The reception began splendidly. The house looked magnificent, and the guests were suitably impressed by the lavish arrangements. Around 8 o'clock, as the dancing commenced, Josephine asked to speak with me privately. We retired to the east parlor, where she presented me with a peculiar locket, claiming it was a wedding gift meant to bring us prosperity. I had just placed it around my neck when she said the strangest thing. Now you will know what it is to be bound against your will. Before I could question her meaning, the curtains nearby erupted in flames. What followed defies rational explanation. The fire spread with unnatural speed, yet moved as if directed by an unseen hand. Guests fled in panic. I attempted to reach the door, but the flames formed a circle around Josephine and myself, close enough that I felt their heat. Yet we remained untouched. Through the roaring of the fire, I swear I heard a woman's voice speaking words in a language I did not recognize. Josephine stood transfixed, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "I'm sorry," over and over. When help finally arrived, the fire had burned itself out, leaving a perfect circle of destruction with us at its center, completely unharmed. Most peculiar of all, on the mantelpiece, which had been reduced to ash, sat a small carved box that I am certain was not there before. Josephine collapsed shortly after and has been insensible since, attended by her mother and their slave woman, May. The doctor diagnosed shock and prescribed laudanum, though I wonder if more sinister forces are at work. The wedding guests have departed, carrying wild tales that will no doubt spread throughout the parish. James Halworth suggested we attribute the incident to faulty wiring in the new chandelier, though I doubt many will believe such a convenient explanation. I write this by candlelight in the undamaged West Wing, unable to sleep. The locket Josephine gave me has vanished. Lost in the confusion, perhaps, or taken. Jonathan looked up from the journal to find Eliza staring at him, her face pale. "The locket," she whispered. "It must have belonged to Celestine, and somehow Josephine obtained it." Jonathan agreed. But what did she mean about being bound against your will? Eliza shook her head. "I don't know, but it sounds as if she deliberately triggered whatever curse or spell Celestine had placed." They continued reading, finding entries that tracked the aftermath of the fire and Josephine's declining health. June 25th, 1815. Josephine remains altered since the fire. She speaks little and eats less. When questioned about the events of our wedding night, she either remains silent or becomes hysterical. The doctor has increased her laudanum dosage, which keeps her docile but does nothing to restore her former self. August 3, 1815. James Halworth visited today. He suggested Josephine might benefit from a change of scenery, perhaps a trip to the coast. I suspect he is more concerned with removing her from local gossip than with her well-being. The story of our wedding fire has grown with each telling, with some now claiming it was divine punishment for unspecified sins. October 17, 1815. Josephine is with child. The doctor believes the responsibilities of motherhood might draw her out of her melancholy. I remain skeptical but will hope for the best. The entries continued in this vein until May 1816, when a terse note recorded, Josephine delivered of a healthy daughter at 3:17 this morning. The child has been named Catherine after my late mother. Subsequent entries showed Edmund's growing frustration with his wife's continued detachment, both from him and from their daughter. Josephine was described as present in body but absent in spirit, spending hours staring at nothing or wandering the grounds aimlessly when not confined to her bed. The final entry about Josephine came in December 1819. Josephine was found this morning in the East Wing ruins, which I have never rebuilt since the fire. She was clutching Catherine's doll and singing softly in French. When the servants approached, she reportedly said, "The circle is complete now," before collapsing. The doctor was called, but she expired before he arrived. No external cause was apparent. She was 25 years old. I find myself more numb than grieved. The woman I buried today was not the same one I married. Whatever happened on our wedding night took more than just the East Wing. Took Josephine's spirit as well. May God grant her the peace in death that eluded her in life. Eliza closed the journal slowly. So Josephine died but never experienced another wedding fire. Because she was already married, Jonathan theorized. The curse, if that's what it is, seems specifically targeted at Halworth weddings. But why does it continue through generations? Eliza wondered. If Celestine's vengeance was against Josephine specifically, why would it extend to her descendants who never wronged Celestine? Jonathan considered this. In many traditions, curses can be placed on bloodlines, not just individuals, particularly if the original wrong was severe enough, like murder, Eliza said quietly. Possibly. Jonathan hesitated, then asked, "Does your family still possess anything that belonged to Josephine? Something that might have survived her wedding fire?" The portrait, Eliza realized. The one you noticed in the foyer, Josephine in her wedding dress. According to family legend, it was hanging in the east parlor of Blackwood Manor during the reception and was found untouched after the fire. So each wedding fire spares one significant object, Jonathan mused. And you've collected them in the sanctuary room. But to what purpose? May said every curse contains its own undoing, Eliza reminded him. Perhaps these objects are part of the solution. They spent another hour examining the Blackwood records but found nothing further that shed light on Celestine or the origin of the fires. As dusk approached, they gathered their notes and prepared to return to Halworth Manor. The ride back was largely silent, both lost in thought about what they'd discovered. The sun was setting as they approached Halworth Land, painting the landscape in fiery hues that felt ominously appropriate. As they neared the house, they spotted 2 additional carriages in the drive. "Charles has returned with my father," Eliza noted, frowning. "And that second carriage belongs to Reverend Caldwell. He wasn't expected until next week to discuss the ceremony." They stabled their horses and entered through a side door, hoping to avoid immediate questioning about their excursion. As they passed the drawing room, however, Colonel Halworth's voice called out sharply, "Eliza, a moment, if you please." Exchanging a glance with Jonathan, Eliza squared her shoulders and entered the drawing room. Jonathan followed, sensing he was equally summoned. Colonel Halworth stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid. Charles Beaumont lounged in an armchair, looking faintly amused. Reverend Caldwell, a thin man with the perpetually concerned expression of one who sees sin in every shadow, stood awkwardly between them. "Father," Eliza acknowledged. "Charles, Reverend Caldwell, where have you been all day?" the colonel demanded without preamble. Mr. Pierce and I rode to Blackwood Manor, Eliza replied evenly. I wanted to show him the library, as he expressed an interest in local history. The Colonel's eyes narrowed. Did you indeed? And did this historical research include a visit to Old May's cabin this morning? Eliza's composure wavered slightly. We did speak with May, yes, about traditional wedding herbs and such matters. Herbs? The Colonel repeated flatly. Is that what you call it? Thatcher sent word ahead that you were poring over Edmund Blackwood's journals from 1815. Rather specific for general historical interest, wouldn't you say? Charles sat forward, his amusement fading. What's this about, sir? The Colonel ignored him, focusing on his daughter. You've been filling this journalist's head with our family's private business, with superstitious nonsense about fires and curses. It's hardly nonsense when it's happened 14 times, Eliza retorted, her voice rising slightly. Or do you suggest we ignore the pattern and pretend my wedding won't end the same way? You are meddling with matters you don't understand, the Colonel snapped. Then help me understand, Eliza pleaded. Tell me what happened to Celestine. The name fell like a stone into still water. The Colonel's face drained of color, while Reverend Caldwell made a small, distressed sound. Where did you hear that name? The Colonel asked, his voice dangerously quiet. May told us about her, Jonathan interjected, drawing the Colonel's glare away from Eliza. A slave purchased from New Orleans in 1814, who disappeared shortly before Josephine's wedding. And what else did that old witch tell her you? The Colonel demanded. Enough to piece together that Celestine's disappearance and the wedding fires are connected, Eliza said. Father, if you know something about this, please. Enough. The Colonel slammed his hand down on the mantelpiece. This conversation is over. Reverend Caldwell will continue our discussion of the ceremony tomorrow. Charles, a word in my study, if you please. As the men filed out, the Colonel paused in the doorway. Mr. Pierce, I expect you to be gone from Halworth Manor by morning. And Eliza, his voice softened slightly, leave the past buried. Some secrets are kept for a reason. Left alone, Eliza sank into a chair, her face a mask of frustration. He knows something he won't tell me, even with my wedding only 10 days away. Jonathan knelt beside her chair. We've made progress today. We know the fires began with Josephine and Celestine, and we know the preserved objects must be significant somehow. But we still don't know how to prevent it from happening again, Eliza pointed out, or if it can be prevented at all. There's one place we haven't looked, Jonathan said thoughtfully. The oak tree at the edge of the swamp, where May hinted Celestine might be buried. Eliza's eyes widened. You think we should, what? Dig there? Not necessarily, but in many traditions, restless spirits are tied to improper burial or unfinished business. If Celestine was indeed murdered and buried secretly, perhaps acknowledging that wrong might be a step toward breaking the cycle. It's worth trying, Eliza agreed, rising with new determination. We'll go tonight, after the house is asleep. Midnight found them at the ancient oak, lanterns casting eerie shadows across the gnarled roots and moss-draped branches. The night was hot and still, the air heavy with moisture and the sense of earth and water. Eliza had changed into a simple dark dress, practical for their clandestine mission. And what else did that old witch tell her you? The Colonel demanded. Enough to piece together that Celestine's disappearance and the wedding fires are connected, Eliza said. Father, if you know something about this, please. Enough. The Colonel slammed his hand down on the mantelpiece. This conversation is over. Reverend Caldwell will continue our discussion of the ceremony tomorrow. Charles, a word in my study, if you please. As the men filed out, the Colonel paused in the doorway. Mr. Pierce, I expect you to be gone from Halworth Manor by morning. And Eliza, his voice softened slightly, leave the past buried. Some secrets are kept for a reason. Left alone, Eliza sank into a chair, her face a mask of frustration. He knows something he won't tell me, even with my wedding only 10 days away. Jonathan knelt beside her chair. We've made progress today. We know the fires began with Josephine and Celestine, and we know the preserved objects must be significant somehow. But we still don't know how to prevent it from happening again, Eliza pointed out, or if it can be prevented at all. There's one place we haven't looked, Jonathan said thoughtfully. The oak tree at the edge of the swamp, where May hinted Celestine might be buried. Eliza's eyes widened. You think we should, what? Dig there? Not necessarily, but in many traditions, restless spirits are tied to improper burial or unfinished business. If Celestine was indeed murdered and buried secretly, perhaps acknowledging that wrong might be a step toward breaking the cycle. It's worth trying, Eliza agreed, rising with new determination. We'll go tonight, after the house is asleep. Midnight found them at the ancient oak, lanterns casting eerie shadows across the gnarled roots and moss-draped branches. The night was hot and still, the air heavy with moisture and the sense of earth and water. Eliza had changed into a simple dark dress, practical for their clandestine mission. She knelt by the tree, examining the stones placed around its base. These form patterns, she observed, similar to symbols I've seen in the carvings on the box in the sanctuary room. Jonathan nodded.
Vive sacred symbols in Vodou tradition.
They're used to call upon the Lwa, spirits, or deities. You seem knowledgeable about such practices, Eliza noted, glancing up at him. My time in Haiti, Jonathan explained. I documented many aspects of their culture, including spiritual traditions. The revolution there was as much spiritual as political. Many believe Vodou rituals played a crucial role in inspiring the slaves to fight for freedom. He knelt beside her, carefully tracing the pattern of stones with his finger. This one represents Ursuli Dantaire, a fierce protective spirit often associated with motherhood and vengeance. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond their lantern light. Both froze, listening intently. After a moment of silence, a figure emerged from the shadows. May, wrapped in a shawl despite the warm night. Thought I might find you here, she said, her voice carrying a mixture of resignation and approval. Figured you wouldn't leave this stone unturned. May, Eliza acknowledged, standing. We're trying to understand what happened to Celestine. Was she buried here? The old woman moved closer, her eyes reflecting the lantern light. Not exactly. Come, there's something you should see. She led them around the massive tree trunk to its far side, where the ground sloped gently toward the swamp water. There, half hidden among roots and decades of fallen leaves, was a small hollow in the trunk, not natural but carved by human hands. May brushed away debris to reveal that the hollow contained a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. This was Celestine's gris-gris, her protective charm, May explained. My mama placed it here after, she paused, after they found her body in the swamp. The official story was that she ran away and must have drowned crossing the swamp. But my mama said Celestine's body bore marks that no swamp could make. Who killed her? Eliza whispered. Your great-grandfather claimed never to know, May replied. But Josephine knew. What happened between them? Jonathan asked. Edmund Blackwood's journal mentioned an inappropriate attachment Josephine had formed with her brother's tutor. May nodded. Thomas Mercer, young man from Boston, educated but without means. They fell in love, but such a match was impossible. The Halworths had already promised Josephine to Edmund Blackwood. And Celestine was involved somehow, Eliza pressed. Josephine went to her for help, May confirmed. But not just for love potions, as rumor had it. She wanted to escape, to run away with Thomas. Celestine had connections in New Orleans among free people of color who might have helped them. But something went wrong, Jonathan guessed. Thomas was dismissed suddenly, sent away with no chance to say goodbye. Josephine was desperate. She returned to Celestine, this time demanding more dangerous magic, something to break her engagement, something to punish those who had separated her from Thomas. May carefully lifted the bundle from the tree hollow. Celestine refused. She practiced healing, not harming. But Josephine wouldn't accept this. In her grief and rage, she stole Celestine's locket, her most powerful protection. containing earth from Haiti blessed by her father, and then accused her of theft to justify her punishment. Eliza concluded, her voice tight with anger at her ancestors' actions. Yes, Celestine was publicly whipped, but that wasn't the end. May unwrapped the bundle to reveal a small doll made of twisted cloth and hair. 3 days before the wedding, Josephine returned to Celestine's quarters, still demanding magical intervention. What happened then, only they knew. But that night, Celestine disappeared, and 3 days later during the wedding reception, the first fire occurred, Jonathan said. May rewrapped the doll carefully. Josephine used the stolen locket somehow, twisted Celestine's own magic against her will. But such things come with a price. The fires became a curse on the Halworth bloodline. Every wedding marked by flames that harm no one but destroy everything except one significant object. Objects we've collected in the sanctuary room, Eliza noted. But why spare these particular things? Because they hold meaning, joy, sorrow, love, betrayal, moments that changed lives. May explained, echoing Isaac's earlier words. Celestine's spirit recognizes what matters most to each bride or groom. The fire destroys everything else but leaves that one thing as a reminder that what truly matters cannot be burned away. The box that appeared after the first fire, Jonathan said. What's inside it? Justice undelivered, May replied cryptically. Truth unspoken, the key to ending the cycle. How do we open it? Eliza asked. We've tried every key in the house. May replaced the bundle in the tree hollow. Not every lock needs a metal key, child. Some require different payment altogether. She straightened, wincing slightly at the effort. It's late. We should return before we're missed. As they walked back toward the house, Jonathan's mind raced with new questions. The Colonel knows this history, doesn't he? That's why he was so alarmed at the mention of Celestine's name. Some secrets get passed down from father to son, May acknowledged. Some truths too shameful to speak aloud. But if he knows, why wouldn't he tell me? Eliza asked, her voice betraying hurt beneath the frustration. My wedding is days away. Surely he doesn't want it to end like all the others. Fear makes people do strange things, May said. And your father has lived with fear his whole life. Fear of the past, fear of judgment, fear of change. They parted at the edge of the gardens, May returning to her cabin while Jonathan and Eliza slipped back into the sleeping house. At the foot of the grand staircase, Eliza paused. I need to see the box again, she whispered. Now, while we have what May told us fresh in our minds. Together they ascended to the 3rd floor and the sanctuary room. Eliza lit a single lamp, keeping it low to avoid attracting attention. The curious artifacts of 14 wedding fires watched silently as she approached the cabinet containing the carved box. It was small, perhaps 6 inches square, its dark wood polished by generations of handling. The carvings were intricate, symbols similar to those formed by the stones around the oak tree, intertwined with what appeared to be flames and figures in motion. May said, Not every lock needs a metal key, Eliza mused, lifting the box carefully. What else could open it? Jonathan examined the box closely. There's no visible keyhole, just this small indentation here. He pointed to a shallow depression on the front of the box, roughly the size of a thimble. It almost looks like it's meant for something to be placed there, Eliza finished. She frowned thoughtfully. The locket. Josephine stole Celestine's locket, then gave it to Edmund during their wedding reception. But Edmund wrote in his journal that it disappeared during the fire. Perhaps it didn't disappear, Jonathan suggested. Perhaps it transformed, became part of this box somehow. Eliza set the box back in its cabinet. If the locket is the key, we're at an impasse. It's been missing for 60 years. Not necessarily missing, Jonathan said slowly. May said Celestine's locket contained earth from Haiti, and each wedding fire spares one significant object. His eyes widened with realization. What if the locket's contents are distributed among all the preserved objects? What if each one contains a piece of what we need? Eliza considered this. But how would we extract it? And how would we know what to look for? I'm not sure, Jonathan admitted, but tomorrow I should speak with Isaac. He mentioned the preserved objects were things that changed lives. He might know more than he initially revealed. Be careful, Eliza cautioned. Isaac has served my father loyally for decades. He won't easily betray a family secret. I'll be discreet, Jonathan promised. Now we should rest. Tomorrow will bring fresh insights. As Eliza moved to extinguish the lamp, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. They exchanged alarmed glances, listening intently. After a moment of silence, Eliza carefully opened the door and peered out. The hallway appeared empty, but as Jonathan joined her, they caught a glimpse of movement at the far end, the tail of a dressing gown disappearing around the corner. "Father," Eliza whispered, dismayed. "He knows we've been in here, which means he'll be watching us more closely now," Jonathan concluded. "We'll need to be more careful tomorrow." Morning brought unexpected developments. Jonathan awoke to find a note slipped beneath his door. Not Eliza's handwriting, but a rougher scrawl. "Meet me at the old mill. Noon. Come alone." Isaac, presumably. Why would the servant risk arranging a private meeting? Breakfast was a tense affair. Colonel Halworth was conspicuously absent, but Charles Beaumont had joined Eliza at the table, discussing wedding details with a proprietary air that Jonathan found distasteful. Eliza responded to her fiancé with cool politeness, her eyes occasionally meeting Jonathan's in silent communication. "I thought your father wanted you gone this morning," Charles remarked to Jonathan between bites of ham. "Yet here you remain." "Mr. Pierce has agreed to stay until tomorrow to complete his interviews," Eliza interjected smoothly, "for his article on Southern wedding traditions." On the desk lay several documents pertaining to the upcoming wedding. Contracts, invoices, correspondence with the Beaumont family. One letter caught his attention, dated just 3 weeks prior, from Charles's father to Colonel Halworth. "James, the arrangements are proceeding as discussed. Charles understands the unique nature of the Halworth situation and accepts the risks involved. As agreed, upon completion of the marriage, regardless of any subsequent events, the full sum of $20,000 will be transferred to Beaumont Shipping, securing Eliza's position as a 10% shareholder. I appreciate your forthright disclosure of the unusual circumstances surrounding Halworth weddings. Rest assured, Charles has been thoroughly briefed and is prepared for any eventuality. He is a practical young man who recognizes the value of this alliance beyond any temporary inconveniences or superstitious concerns. Yours in confidence, William Beaumont." Jonathan stared at the letter, its implications clear. The Beaumonts knew about the wedding fires, had been explicitly told, and considered them an acceptable risk for the financial gain involved. The marriage was a business transaction, with Eliza as the commodity being exchanged. His disgust was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Quickly replacing the letter exactly as he'd found it, Jonathan slipped out through a connecting door that led to a small parlor, then made his way casually back to the main hall. By noon, he was approaching the ruins of the old sugar mill, a hulking structure of brick and rusted machinery, partially reclaimed by vegetation. No sign of Isaac was immediately visible, but as Jonathan neared the main building, the servant emerged from the shadows of a collapsed wall. "Mr. Pierce," he acknowledged with a nod. "Thank you for coming, and for coming alone." "Your note suggested urgency," Jonathan replied. "How can I help you, Isaac?" The servant glanced around nervously before responding. "It's not me who needs help, sir. It's Miss Eliza."
I'm listening.
Isaac led him deeper into the ruins to what had once been the mill's engine room. "I've served the Halworths all my life, as did my mother before me. Loyalty is expected, not freely given." He spoke quietly, as if afraid of being overheard, even in this abandoned place. "But Miss Eliza has always been kind, different. She doesn't deserve what's coming." "You mean the wedding fire?" Jonathan asked. Isaac shook his head. "The fire is just fire, sir. It's what comes after that concerns me." "I don't understand." Isaac reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "This fell from the colonel's pocket yesterday. I shouldn't have read it, but... He handed it to Jonathan. See for yourself. The paper contained a short message in elegant handwriting. All arrangements confirmed. Following the ceremony and inevitable incident, C will escort E to the sanitarium as discussed. Dr. Whitfield assures discretion. Given family history of nervous disposition, J's melancholy, E's mother's episodes, no questions will be raised. Commitment papers ready for your signature. Jonathan felt cold despite the Louisiana heat. They're planning to have Eliza committed to an asylum after the wedding fire. Isaac nodded grimly. The colonel believes the fire is inevitable, but the scandal needn't be. If Miss Eliza is safely tucked away in a sanitarium for nervous disorders, the family reputation suffers less damage, and Charles is complicit in this. For the right price, that man would be complicit in anything, Isaac said with quiet contempt. The colonel has invested heavily in Beaumont shipping, money he doesn't actually have. This marriage secures his investment and gives Charles control of Halworth land once Miss Eliza is indisposed. Jonathan folded the paper carefully, his mind racing. Does Eliza know about this? No, sir. And the colonel would kill me for telling you, perhaps literally. But someone needs to warn her, and she trusts you. Thank you, Isaac. I'll find a way to tell her discreetly. Jonathan hesitated, then added, There's something else I wanted to ask you, about the objects preserved from the wedding fires. Isaac's expression became guarded. What about them? You said they were things that changed lives. What did you mean by that? The servant was silent for a long moment, then said, Each object marks a moment of choice. Sometimes the right choice, more often the wrong one. The music box played when my grandmother's sister chose to risk her life to save a child. The pocket watch stopped at the exact moment when Josephine's son decided to sell 3 families to pay a gambling debt. And the box that appeared after the first fire. Do you know what it contains? Truth, Isaac replied simply. The kind of truth that burns hotter than any fire. How do we open it? That I don't know, sir. But old May. He glanced at the sky. I should return before I'm missed. Be careful, Mr. Pierce. The colonel is not a man to cross lightly. After Isaac departed, Jonathan remained in the mill ruins, contemplating this new information. The colonel's plan to have his own daughter committed was despicable, but explained his increasing agitation as the wedding approached. If Eliza learned the truth about Celestine, if she found a way to break the cycle of fires, his arrangement with the Beaumonts would be jeopardized. Jonathan needed to warn Eliza as soon as she returned from town. But beyond that, they needed to solve the mystery of the box and Celestine's curse before the wedding, now only 9 days away. As he made his way back to the house, a carriage was arriving. Not Eliza and Charles returning, but Reverend Caldwell, the thin, nervous minister he'd met briefly the previous evening. The Reverend appeared even more ill at ease in daylight, mopping his brow constantly despite the shade provided by his wide-brimmed hat. Mr. Pierce, isn't it? Caldwell greeted him with forced joviality. I understand you're writing about Southern traditions. Fascinating subject. Indeed, Jonathan agreed, falling into step beside the Reverend, particularly traditions that persist despite changing times. Yes, well, tradition is the foundation of society, Caldwell replied vaguely. Without it, we'd all be adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Some traditions might be better left behind, though, Jonathan suggested, especially those born of injustice or suffering. Caldwell gave him a sharp look. You refer to something specific, I take it. Jonathan maintained an expression of scholarly interest. I've been researching the curious pattern of fires at Halworth weddings, a remarkable consistency over 60 years, almost as if guided by an unseen hand. The Reverend's already pale complexion became positively ghostly. Such talk borders on superstition, Mr. Pierce. As a man of the cloth, I cannot condone it. Of course, Jonathan conceded. Though I wonder, as a man of the cloth, what would you say about a wrong never righted, a death never acknowledged? Doesn't Christian doctrine call for confession and atonement before forgiveness can be granted? Caldwell stopped walking, his thin face pinched with conflict. After a moment, he said quietly, "The church records from 1815 are stored in the parish archive. They are complete," he emphasized the word strangely, "including matters not recorded in family histories. Would these records be accessible to a researcher such as myself? The archive is open Wednesday afternoons for historical purposes." With that cryptic response, Caldwell hurried toward the house, as if afraid of saying more. Jonathan made a mental note to visit the parish archive at the first opportunity. Today was Monday. He would have to wait 2 days, precious time with the wedding approaching rapidly. Eliza and Charles returned late in the afternoon. She looked exhausted, though whether from the trip to town or her fiancé's company was unclear. Jonathan had no opportunity to speak with her privately until after dinner, when Charles and the Colonel retired to the study for brandy. "Walk with me in the garden," Eliza suggested, loud enough for the departing men to hear. "I'd value your thoughts on which flowers might photograph well for your article." Once outside and safely distant from the house, she spoke urgently. "Something's wrong. Charles has barely left my side all day, and Father has arranged for my aunt to arrive tomorrow to help with preparations. She's never shown the slightest interest in me before. They're planning to have you committed after the wedding," Jonathan said bluntly, seeing no gentle way to deliver the news. He explained what Isaac had discovered, showing her the note. Eliza's face drained of color, but she showed no other reaction for several long moments. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "I'm not entirely surprised. Father has always been concerned with appearances above all else, and I've seen how he looks at me sometimes, as if expecting me to shatter like my mother supposedly did. You don't believe she suffered from nervous episodes. I was young when she died, but I remember her as strong, vibrant, different from the other plantation wives. She read extensively, spoke her mind, taught me to think for myself." Eliza's expression hardened. "Which is precisely what makes me inconvenient now. We need to accelerate our investigation," Jonathan urged. Reverend Caldwell hinted that the church records from 1815 might contain information about Celestine. "I can visit the archive on Wednesday." "Too late," Eliza said decisively. "We'll go tomorrow. Tonight, I want to examine the preserved objects more carefully." May and Isaac both emphasized their importance. "There must be something we're missing." After ensuring they weren't observed, they made their way once again to the sanctuary room. This time, Eliza systematically removed each artifact from its cabinet, placing them on the central table for examination. 14 wedding fires, 14 preserved objects," she murmured, "plus the mysterious box that started it all." Jonathan studied the collection. Isaac said each object marks a moment of choice. What if they're not just random items that survived the fires? What if they were deliberately spared to tell a story? What kind of story? A family history, but the real one, not the sanitized version passed down through generations. Jonathan picked up the pocket watch Isaac had mentioned. This stopped at the moment Josephine's son made a terrible choice affecting other lives. He examined the watch closely, noting that the hands had indeed stopped at 3:17. "The same time your great-grandfather recorded your grandmother Catherine's birth," he realized, recalling Edmund's journal. "May 7th, 1816, at 3:17 in the morning." Eliza's eyes widened. "You think these objects are all connected to specific moments in my family's history? Moments of moral significance?" "Precisely," Jonathan agreed, excitement building. "Not just random keepsakes, but markers of pivotal choices, right or wrong, that shaped the Halworth legacy." They began examining each object with new purpose, Eliza providing family context where she could. The music box had belonged to a great-aunt who rescued a slave child from drowning. The Bible had been given to a Halworth who later became a minister and argued against secession before the war. The silver hairbrush had been used by a cousin who cut off her hair to sell when the family faced financial ruin. Each object, they realized, was associated with a moment when a Halworth faced a moral crossroads and made a choice that affected others, sometimes nobly, sometimes despicably. But what does this tell us about opening the box? Eliza wondered, frustrated. "We're still missing something," Jonathan picked up the carved box, turning it carefully in his hands. The shallow depression on its front seemed to mock their efforts. May said, "Not every lock needs a metal key. Some require different payment altogether." "Payment?" Eliza repeated thoughtfully. "Like a price to be paid for truth or for justice," Jonathan suggested. "If Celestine was murdered, if your ancestors covered up that crime, perhaps the price is acknowledgement. Confession." Eliza stared at him, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. "The truth that burns hotter than any fire," she whispered, echoing Isaac's words. "But how do we—" She suddenly reached for her throat, unfastening a thin gold chain that had been hidden beneath her collar. From it hung a small key, an antique, intricately worked. "My grandmother gave me this on her deathbed," Eliza explained, echoing her earlier words about the key to the sanctuary room. "She said I would need it when the time."